Hey everybody, welcome back to the Words of Life podcast. We have reached another milestone as we've finished another week of our reading through the New Testament. And this last week we've read Mark chapters 6 through 12. And I've got Kevin with me again as we just kind of wanted to go through and do some recap of the readings and some of the things that we noticed from them. So welcome, Kevin. Hope you had an amazing week.
Yeah, it was good. It was a good weekend. We had one of our previous foster babies with us this weekend. We were watching it for her mom. So we had a 8-month-old and a 16-month-old this weekend. And that made me realize that I am old, is what that made me realize. One baby at a time is fine. Two, especially one of them is mobile, is a whole other challenge. So that's why you typically have babies in your 20s and maybe early 30s, not your late 40s. But anything exciting for you?
Well, I'm a realtor, so
weekends are always hopping.
It's one of those things that it's as I'm growing the business out here. Ideally, I should be busy all the time.
Sure, right.
And it's getting to that point, which is great, and a lot more referrals, a lot more incoming organic business like that. But had a couple from church that wanted to sell their house and move closer to his work and also simultaneously closer to where we meet in Oak Ridge. Man, it was a struggle. It was really a struggle. We went through 3 buyers. Okay. The last one was somewhat problematic. We ended up having to replace their roof at the last minute. But we pulled in lots of favors and lots of free labor from brethren and friends and stuff like that to just get it done so that they could afford to do it. It really did need to get done, unfortunately, but the good news is they were able to save the house that they had fallen in love with. Perfect for them. They're going to be able to grow their family there, and for a long time, it's going to be a great place for us. So all in all, massively awesome result. But I joined in on the free labor. I helped them move. So it's not just the real estate stuff. I tend to do a lot more than just help them buy and sell. That's just part of my nature. But I like to be helpful and useful. Nice. So But so. When you say I'm feeling old, I'm like, I get that. I'm like, everything's achy and still kind of recovering from all that, but fun. So as we were talking offline, for the sake of our audience here, I realized that this last week of reading, it actually impacted me on multiple occasions differently this time on a more emotional level. And I realized that maybe just because I'm getting older and I'm seeing the world a little differently, or maybe that I'm just growing in my understanding of the reality of Jesus and the reality of life, coupled with, just some other influences. You'd mentioned The Chosen, for instance, a couple weeks ago or episodes ago, and I have never actually sat down and watched the entire thing. I've watched an episode, I think, or 2 of the actual full thing, but I kept seeing these little snippets as I scrolled through YouTube, which I spent a lot of time on YouTube, both as a creator and a just purveyor of stuff. But I kept seeing these little snippets, and they were really good clips and scenes of these interactions that the character playing Jesus was having. And it just struck me how often I think about Jesus more like a superhero. A mythological, unstoppable force with, cosmic powers and all that kind of stuff. And while that's all true, he was simultaneously a man, human, just like me. And the humanity of Jesus really kind of struck me as I was reading through this week. I remember being sad. We started in chapter 6. Jesus begins preaching in his hometown in Nazareth. I mean, imagine. It's a small village, probably. Who knows what the population of Nazareth was back then, right? But all pedestrian. Everybody knew who he was. That he knew them. He worked beside them. He learned and grew up beside them. And to go back and to be rejected by them, it just brought back a flood of experiences and memories throughout my life when I've been rejected. And it just made me feel differently this week.
Yeah, I know we kind of talked about that a little bit, and when you said that, it made me think of some stuff I had looked at to figure out, who wrote the God. I'm always interested, and to be fair, this probably started when I was back in college. I took a class, maybe I've said it on this podcast before, where we had to do a Bible course, and one of the things that they talked about as the method for first study for that course was we're going to look at the world behind the text. That is, what is the setting and the context? What are the world within the text? That is to what you actually see there, and the world in front of the text. Before you see, that's how you make application. And so this idea then is, okay, who wrote it? To whom was it written? What's the purpose? What's the theme? So I come to a lot of the New Testament letters and the Gospels from sort of this literary perspective, and maybe that's also because I spend a lot of time hanging around ELA teachers and high school teachers in my career. And so, as you're looking at who wrote Mark, to whom was it written, who's the audience, what's its theme, those kinds of things, there are some strong suggestions. A lot of people that will summarize it will say, Mark's purpose in writing is that he's trying to get his readers to see the sufferings and the hardships of Jesus and get them to relate themselves to him, right? To see, oh, yes, my sufferings that I may be going through right now, because the church is suffering persecution early on, at least at the hands of the Jews, right? I mean, they're getting, after Pentecost, the Jews are bringing them, the apostles in and commanding them not to teach, all that kind of stuff. And so he may be trying to get his own readers to think about, hey, your sufferings are not that different from Jesus's, and to connect him. And so these things that you're feeling about, oh, I notice the things that Jesus is going through and how it's striking me emotionally, that may very well be Mark's intended purpose, right? That he wants it to resonate emotionally with you. That's why he tells these stories. That's why maybe he brings them so rapid fire, one after the next, almost in a way that's overwhelming, right? That may be his intended purpose or perspective. So I would suggest maybe you're not the first person to feel that way when reading it. And we usually don't notice because maybe we're not reading every day, in the same book or in the same letter.
Right.
So when you do it that way, like we've already said, you kind of pick up on different things, right, that you maybe didn't pick up on before. And so, it's a good observation. I would say that.
And it's just one of those things. Like, so when I record the reading, sometimes I realize that I've just read it out loud, but I have the words, the meaning of the words hasn't necessarily sunk in.
Because you're so focused on the other things, right?
Sometimes I find myself like either listening to it again, as listening to myself read it back to me, or I just go through and I just re-examine so that what I just orated is sinking in. So I think actually by doing that, I end up reading it 2 or 3 times that way, and I think because of that, I'm more invested in some of these things. And I would challenge you all to start reading it out loud. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that'll help everybody. But I just recall, you and I both, we grew up in not impoverished homes, right? Yeah. We've never been wanting anything, any of the necessities of life. I've never gone hungry. I've never been, we really had a decent house, and we always had food on the table, and nothing really bad was a part of my life. Outside of the fact that I was a big chubby kid, and I got picked on because of that. And so when I think about rejection from your own hometown people, those kind of things popped into my head quite a bit. Just childhood stupid things, whether you're getting isolated because of your lack of ability in one sport or another, or you're like the last kid to get picked on a team. You're like the leftovers, or those types of things that happen in life. And then, I've been fired for my lack of work ethic, a time or two when I was younger, and just lack of performance or just wasn't showing up. So that was obviously I deserved those.
It was my fault, right? Yeah.
But it was still a rejection, right?
Yeah.
And a couple of times it was unexpected. One time the company actually got bought and sold, and everybody lost their job. That was an unexpected unemployment. But, so minor rejections like that. But to the level of Jesus coming back and teaching and preaching, and they couldn't get past the fact that, isn't this that guy that just grew up down the street?
We knew this guy, right? Yep.
Yeah. Aren't his brothers and sisters right here? And, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown, among his relatives, and in his own household. That's sad. That's just really sad. So that was one of the things that kind of struck me. We also noted in Matthew, but here, maybe not so much here, but Jesus felt sorrow and grief over John the Baptist. And it indicates to me, both in Matthew and in Mark, that he really wanted time to to go and grieve and just be alone and deal with that. And yet work got in the way, air quotes work, because people still needed Jesus. And he had to put his own personal desire to mourn and grieve and be alone aside for other people.
Yeah, and we do see that a lot in Mark, right?
Yeah.
The crowds are a constant theme in Mark that we see popping up. The 5,000, the feeding, the 4,000, the feeding. He'll tell people, maybe it was in last week's reading that was, but he'll tell people, don't say the things I've done for you, and they'll immediately go out. I think that's early in Mark. They immediately go out and spread the news. So it says so much that he couldn't even go into the cities and towns anymore, right? But he had to basically reside outside in the wilderness. He had to reside in the countryside, and they would come to him. And that's certainly, we get that picture in the healing of the lame man, where they lower him down through the roof. The crowd is so pressed, right? They can't even get in through the house. And so, there's this constant sort of pressure upon him of the expectations of the people, the needs of the people. When you get the feeding of the 4,000, in chapter 8, his concern there is, if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from very far. Right? So all these people came to hear me, and they don't have food to eat, and we're really far out from any place. I feel for them, right? I feel bad for them. I feel, now, again, he knows what he's going to do, and he certainly has the ability, but that doesn't lessen his human motivation to say, I can't send these people away. They have nothing, right? And they've come to hear me speak and hear the message of the kingdom of God. How can I turn them away and say, hope you don't faint on the way back to your houses, right? From hunger. And so that's when he says, hey, give them something to eat, right? We got to feed these people, right? And so, you see throughout this pressure of the crowd, Jesus' response to them emotionally, and just his humanness, right? And certainly we can relate to those things, right? The pressure of expectations, the rejection that happens, even in that next thing, after he's just done those things in Mark 8, right? He's fed and he's walked on water, he's done these things, he's healed. Then the Pharisees come and say, give us a sign. Right? What? Right? Have you ever been disbelieved after you've clearly demonstrated everything, and they say, we need more proof, any more evidence? What? Come on, man, right? And so certainly, and that time he just says, no sign will be given to you. I like the way Mark does it. No sign will be given to you. He gets in a boat and he leaves, right?
You are the weakest link. Goodbye.
Yep, goodbye. Right. No, I'm done. Right. And then he immediately tells his people, right? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, right? While they're on the boat, as far as I could tell, right? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And what do his disciples do? They think he's talking about literal bread. And he's like, wait, you just saw me make bread from basically nothing, right? And you said they have one loaf. So it's not like they had no bread. They had a loaf of bread. You would have thought they were like, we're good. We got a loaf of bread. Jesus can turn us as many loaves as we need. But they think he's talking about bread, right? And he's like, what? Why are you talking about this? You have no bread. How do you not still see? Right? Like just the frustration even with his own students, right?
Yeah, so you've really kind of hit on some of those things that I had listed down. So he had this, Jesus felt sorrow and grief. He was constantly overwhelmed, surrounded, crowded in on all sides. I'm a pretty outgoing people person, but I have a definite limit to how many people I can be around for an extended period of time. Part of that is, and I was telling you that part of that is like when I'm, especially if I'm a host of something, I feel the pressure of pleasing everybody.
Right. I got to feed all these people, right?
Well, I mean, normally the food is pretty much handled, but it's more than that, I've always been kind of a people pleaser, and so I have this need for like making sure everybody's okay and
right,
happy,
everybody having a good time,
right? So I've got this level of anxiety. It's not major. I'm not suffering
right.
Anxiety. I don't need medication for it, but there's definitely a limit for me where I just can't. I just have to retreat for a little bit.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this. I mean, I would have never came off the mountain.
Right.
Right. For Jesus, like he retreats up to the mountain, he's praying, he's communing with God, and he's there's no people clamoring for his attention and for his time and his but he came off the mountain every time, and he went right to the people and had compassion on the people, and he did it anyway. And that's kind of one of the recurring themes that I'm seeing here. Jesus did it anyway, despite his own personal whatevers, you know, and so that's definitely a lesson for us. The older we get and the more adulting mastery we take on. We get that. We do it anyway for our kids. When our kids are little, they can't take care of themselves. Regardless of how you feel, you have to do it anyway. So Jesus really was able to look at the whole world like children that needed to get taken care of. And that's a massive skill and a massive level of faith and just compassion, kindness, trumping everything else. It's just amazing. Just amazing. The level of frustration. So we get into chapter 8, and when you were just talking about the disciples, arguing about bread, and the warning Jesus says, do you really still not get it? Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? He says, do you not yet perceive or understand? Or are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? Like, all of these rhetorical questions that are designed specifically to make them wake up. Pay attention. You should be growing in your faith. And so, but that frustration, is real. How often do we get frustrated with people? And yet he continues to teach them. He continues to build them up. He continues to support them, because he knows that it's coming real soon where he's going to leave them and they're going to need to stand on their own 2 feet. He's going to send the Spirit and the Helper to make sure they have all things that they're going to need, but he is no longer going to be there for them to lift them up and to support them and to be the spiritual rabbi that they've come to expect and to lean on and take for granted probably.
Yeah, that's certainly true. When you talked about Mark 8 and that feeding of the 4,000 there, and then the leaven of the Pharisees and how they're saying, hey, he's talking about bread, and he's like, what are you talking about? Why do you think I'm talking about bread? And that's an interesting connection that gets kind of pulled through a couple of chapters there, because in chapter 7 is when he feeds the 5,000. And so Mark does something interesting, right? He has the feeding of the 5,000 in chapter 7. Then he immediately has the walking on the water. Right? And in both accounts of the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000, in both accounts, it's very specific how they go out and they collect leftovers afterwards, right? Like they each go out and get, pick up the leftover pieces. And in chapter 7, after they feed the 5,000, they take up 12 baskets full, right? Which, okay, why did they pick up 12 baskets? Well, the answer seems pretty evident, because there's 12 of them picking stuff up. Right, so each of them stands there and holds a basket full of bread when they're done, right? And then right after that, they walk on the water, and they're terrified. He gets in the boat, the wind ceases, and they're all utterly astounded. Though he's walked on the water, that the storm has ceased as soon as he gets in the boat. We don't get Peter walking to him or anything like that in Mark's account. He just gets in the boat, and the stop says, and they're astounded. And then Mark says this: for they were astounded. Why? For they did not understand about the lesson of the loaves, but their hearts were hardened, right? Like, you were supposed to have learned something from staring at a basket of miracle bread, right? Yeah. And so then chapter 8, he feeds the 4,000, and then he says, hey, watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees, after they demand a sign. Mm-hmm. What? Right? After all the things he's done, they demand a sign. And then he says, beware the leaven of the Pharisees. And the disciples are like, oh man, yeah, bread. And he's like, you still don't get it, right? So in chapter 7, you didn't get the lesson of the loaves. Then I did it again for you with 4,000, and this time you take up 7 left over. And then I ask you, what happened last time? What happened when I fed the 5,000? What happened to the 4,000? And you didn't get it either time? Like, come on, man. There was a lesson there you were learning. I wasn't just feeding people because I wanted to feed people. Certainly I had compassion on them. But, and John's account makes it pretty clear when you read John's narrative of the feeding of the 5,000, he asks them, he tests them and says, what should we do to feed these people, right, the first time? So there's clearly a thing. He's trying to get them to learn something. And he's like, okay, you didn't get the lesson, and you didn't get the lesson again, so I repeated it. And then you still didn't get the lesson after I walked on the water, and you still didn't get the lesson, right? It's just a constant sort of a thing that he's trying to drive home to them of who he really is and what he's really about, right? And look, I teach students, and sometimes I'm like, how are you not still getting this, right? And that's just, why can't you grasp the fact that when you dilate a shape, its area increases by squared and not just the actual scale factor? We've done this 4 days in a row, and you had it yesterday, and now you've forgotten it today, right? And I get frustrated And that
Yeah.
doesn't even matter, right? Like, I don't care if they know in their lives that that's what happens, right? It doesn't even make
Yeah.
a difference. But that, how can you imagine that frustration when you're talking about serious spiritual things there? And I'm the master teacher, Jesus. We always say, Jesus, is the master teacher. And listen,
Yeah.
I can relate, man. When the kids don't pick it up, I get it.
Yeah, but master teacher would really love some master students,
Yes,
every
right.
once in
That's
a
right.
while. Just thank you so much for learning and
Yes, right, right. Yeah.
and picking up what I'm putting down.
Yeah.
So another one of the themes that I had noticed as well this time, and I think magnified because of how brief Mark is. Jesus is preparing his people for his departure, his death. At least 3 times. He's going to repeat this, hey, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, and I'm going to be taken, and I'm going to be arrested, and I'm going to be killed, and then I'm going to rise again after 3 days. I don't think I've ever really thought much about how often he's talking about that from the perspective of Jesus himself. It was always about what did the apostles need to learn? Why was Jesus preparing them for it? But I can't imagine being in Jesus' shoes and knowing that I was going to have to go through that. We oftentimes just think, he reaches the Mount of Olives and he has praying 3 times and his disciples are asleep. That's really kind of the apex of his emotional sorrow and grief and his anxiety for not wanting to go through what he was going to go through, the torture and the beatings and the crucifixion itself. But Jesus is thinking about this a lot. This is weighing on him. I don't think I'm reading too much into it, but he knows it's happening way longer than anybody else does. And as a man, knowing that your execution date is shrinking, you have a very, very, like if you're in prison, I don't know, you committed some heinous, you're committed, you're sentenced to the death penalty.
Yeah.
And your execution date's been set. What do you go through as that gets closer and closer? And so Jesus, while not guilty of anything, doesn't deserve it at all. He's approaching this, and
He knows it's there.
He knows it's there, and it's coming. So you get into, still in chapter 8, he's been teaching them these lessons, and he again tells them, he's preparing them. He began to teach them right there in 31 in chapter 8. The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. There was no parable. There was no hidden messages. It was plain, easy to understand language. So your best friends, the people that are also supposed to lift you up and prepare you and help you and support you, one of the main ones says, nope, I don't think so, Jesus.
Right, yeah.
How did that make Jesus feel? It's hard enough preparing yourself to go through all of that. And I can only imagine just having somebody just completely say, hey, I'm going to have this life-saving surgery or whatever, right? Or I have to have my leg amputated. And somebody's, you're good.
Yeah, right. No,
You're
it's
fine.
not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean,
he certainly is coming from a place, right, because it is interesting the way it gets told in Mark's account, right, that he says, first time here he says, he told them plainly this, and Peter says, no, man, right? Like, basically, we can stop this. We can prevent this, right? No. That doesn't have to happen to you. We'll never let it happen to you, Jesus. We'll stand in the way. We'll die. We'll make sure you don't, right? Kind of a mindset. And so they just don't understand. The first time he tells them this, it seems like they don't understand the purpose, right? Because he says, get behind me, Satan. Like, this is, you're not setting your mind on things of God. You think you're trying to do God's work by preventing the Son of Man from dying, but this is the plan, right? And so then the second time he tells them this, and the second time is in, I think, the very next chapter, 9, Transfiguration. Yeah. It's the very next time is in chapter 9. You're going through Galilee. He teaches his disciples, like, the Son of Man is going to be delivered in the hands of men. They'll kill him. And when he's killed, though, in 3 days he'll rise. And this time, they don't understand what he's saying, but they're afraid to ask, right? So it's like, okay, we don't get what he's saying here. I mean, he seems to be saying that he's going to die and rise, but, like, that can't be what he's saying, right? But no one dares to ask him because, Peter said something. He got rebuked, right?
Yeah.
And then you'll have the third time, which is in the very next chapter, chapter 10. So 8, 9, 10, 3 times in a row, right? And the third time, he just spells it out very clearly again, right? They're going to Jerusalem now. They're on their way there. And it says he's taking the 12. He's telling them again, this is what's going to happen when we get there, right? And this time there's not any sort of response at all from that, right? It's just, here's what Jesus says. They'll mock
Yeah.
him, they'll spit on him, they'll flog him, kill him. After 3 days, he's going to rise again. We don't get any sort of response from the disciples, as near we can tell, except the very next thing that Mark records for us is when James and John come and ask and say, hey, can we do whatever we ask of you? Right? And he's like, yeah, what do you want? And they go, let us sit on your right and your left hand, right? And he's like, I was just telling you that I'm going to die and these sorts of things. And now you're like, well, hey, if you're on your way out, can you do something for us first? Right? Kind of a thing. I don't even know what their mindset is there, but
Yeah.
the way Mark sets it up is interesting.
It is.
And because it's immediately following, there's that little statement there, but right before that's the rich young ruler, and he's talking about how difficult it is for the rich man to enter the kingdom. And the last thing he says, right, many who are first will be last, and the last will be first.
Yep.
And then these two guys come and say, hey, can we have first place?
Yeah, we want to be first.
He's like, but did you not listen to? So you're right. You can only sort of imagine in your mind the frustration, the long frustration, not the right, the long suffering patience of Jesus, right? As he continually tries to teach these things with little regard for his own, sort of thought about it.
I actually wrote down frustration.
Yeah, sure. Right.
I did, because I'm really trying to put to realize that Jesus was a human.
Right. What's this humanity? Right. Yep.
Right. Frustration is not sin. It's not not a sinful attitude. It's a very normal response when things are overwhelming and things are not going their way, and your students aren't getting the lesson that you're trying to teach them. Frustration is natural. And then you have one of your prime students completely try to
subvert
subvert your plan and the things that have to take place. And I just, when he says, I mean, it's a massive rebuke.
Right. Get behind me,
Get
Satan.
behind me, Satan. I can't have you tearing me down, Peter. You are not setting your mind on the things of God, which is another recurring theme that we've seen throughout these two, right? Jesus is teaching us we have to put our mind beyond this world into the heavenly things and the more important things, the things that are going to last, which is almost leading to like one of the in today's or yesterday's reading in chapter 12. And we can jump back and forth, but the last thing we read was this poor widow. Jesus was sitting there watching the money, the treasury box,
the offerings put in
the offering, and rich people were coming in and lots of big sums of money, and I'm sure they were more than happy to do that. And he wasn't saying anything wrong about that. But all of those people gave out of abundance. Wasn't really a sacrifice for them because they had plenty. And so by giving in abundance, they were doing their duty, and it was a good thing to do, but there was no real impact in their lives. Compared to this woman who put in 2 copper coins, which equals a penny. I don't know what penny it was referring to at that point, but a very small amount of money. But you know what? It was all she had. All. It was every piece of money she had. She gave to God, leaving her nothing to live on.
That's what it says, right? She has, because you sometimes you go, what is it? Does he mean all, right? What does he mean he put all that she had? But this one's very clear. She put out of her poverty, has put everything she had, comma, all she had to live on, right? Like this is everything. She's giving her last 2 coins to the temple, right?
Yeah.
This is all that she's got to live on. And his point there is that she has put in more than them, right? And so I think the idea that he wants them to see is, it's not about the actual literal how much. It's about what are you giving all, right? That's what he wants them to see, right? Her 2 whatever is nothing compared to the large sums being put in the other, but it's more because it's all she had. She gave 100%, right? Not 10%. Right, she gave 100%, which is, again, when you look at the law required that you give your tithe, right? You bring your 10% offering, right? And she said, nope, I'm going to give 100% instead of the 10%, right? And so that's where he sort of points her out. And so, we're still reading about it to this day, right? This thing that she
Yeah.
gave. We don't know her name. We don't know anything about her. We don't know what happened to her afterwards.
Nope.
Nope. But what we know is that Jesus was pleased with her, right? And he pointed out
Yeah.
her great offering and her great sacrifice.
Well, and what kind of faith does that take?
Put in everything you got.
Did she impoverish herself, requiring her to then go beg on the streets?
Right.
Proverbs teaches that it's not good to be poor, because because you will have to beg,
Well, yeah, and the Lemuel will say, right, that
right?
lest I steal, right? If
Lest I
my only
steal,
option
yeah.
is to go and steal something from someone else, right?
Right.
But she
So-
really is taking this sort of mindset that was all the way back in like the manna in the wilderness, right? You gather what you need for today, and you trust that God will send more tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Like that was the lesson they were supposed to be learning. God will send more tomorrow. I once heard it said that look at the Lord's Prayer, right? It's give us this day our daily bread, right? Give me the bread for today that I need today, and tomorrow I'll pray for tomorrow's, right? But give us this day our daily bread, not give me a week's worth of bread so I don't have to pray tomorrow, right? Give me the daily bread so I can pray again tomorrow and come to you and ask for more.
So I know I've mentioned this story probably a couple times, but everybody has faith building moments in life and things like that. And it doesn't matter. It's not about me, but it was about Norton Dye. If you remember Norton, you and I both know Norton. He's passed on since now. But actually, it's Patrick's granddad, right, with you guys. But Norton was a lifelong gospel preacher, minister, and pastor, and elder, shepherd. But as his vocation, he made his income was because full-time dedication to preaching the word. And the congregations, every congregation he worked with supported him in that way. And he had confided in one of the brethren out there. He had remarried after his first wife passed away to Beth. And between he and Beth, they were personally supporting lots of preachers all over the world, maybe all over the country or the world.
Yeah.
But they were giving of their own money to these men so that they could, enabling these men to adequately go and preach and work in the kingdom. And so, the gentleman that they were speaking with was just kind of doing the math in his head and knowing how much Norton made from the church. He's like, the math doesn't really work out here, Norton. How are you able to do that? He asks. And I'll never forget this lesson. I didn't hear it straight from Norton, but I'll give him total credit and accuracy. His very response to this man was, God has a bigger shovel than I do.
Yeah, right.
He has a bigger shovel than I do. God fills up my shovel, and I empty it, and then he fills it up.
He just fills it up again, right? Yeah. I
don't know where the money comes from.
That's right.
We always have enough, and we always empty our shovel.
Right.
And I'm like, that's the kind of level of faith that we're seeing here in this woman who gave.
Yeah.
She emptied her shovel.
Yep.
And she put her trust in God. And I don't know if I've got that level of faith.
Yeah.
It really makes me, I wouldn't say ashamed, but it makes me.
It should contemplate, right?
Well, and it makes me afraid.
Yeah.
To take that, to do that. And that's not good. I need to be able to grow beyond that. And I think that, again, having just read how Jesus taught about how hard it is for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. Why?
Yeah.
Why is it hard? Because we are attached to the things of this world. That's why it's hard.
Yeah, you mentioned that in chapter 10, right? I think we talked about this a little bit before. I'm always struck by chapter 10, how they play next to each other there. And really, it keeps going 10, 11, 12, all the way through.
Yeah.
But in chapter 10, you have this rich young ruler story, right, that we've seen already before we read Matthew.
Yep.
And we talked about how, he comes and he freezes things and, Jesus says, hey, go sell all you have and come and follow me, right? And he gets a personal invitation to walk around and follow Jesus like one of the apostles, right? And it says he's disheartened. He goes on his way, right? He goes on his way. That's the words he used. He goes away sorrowful, for he had great possessions, right? And then Jesus teaches the story about it's difficult for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven, right? And who will be able to do that, right? That's impossible with man, but with God all things are possible, right? And then he foretells his death. And then the very next story there, after the conversation about James and John coming and saying, we'd like to be first, right? And he's like, wait, no, you just missed what I just said, right, about being in those positions. You want to be last. Then we have the chapter closes with the counterexample, right? They're leaving Jericho. There's a great crowd. There's a blind beggar who's shouting out, Jesus, have mercy on me, right? And he gets rebuked. People around him say, stop bothering master, stop bothering, right? And he just calls out all the louder, right? Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And so he stops and he says, hey, I come here. And so they all say, hey, look, he's calling you. He wants. And the man, right, it says, he throws off his cloak and he springs up and he runs to Jesus, right? This guy's a blind beggar, right? What's the only thing he probably owns? The only thing he owns is probably his cloak, right? And he throws it off to go see Jesus. Jesus, what do you want me to do? And he says, I want to see, right? Let me recover my sight. So Jesus says, go your way, right? Go on your way. Your faith has made you well. Immediately he recovered his sight, right? So Jesus told him what? Hey, you're healed. Enjoy. Go on your way, right? Just like the rich man did. He went on his way, right? Mm-hmm. And this guy instead, he does what? He doesn't get a personal invitation. He's told, go on, enjoy your life now, right? You can see, enjoy it. And he says, and he followed him on the way, right? So he instead decides, I'm going to follow Jesus. As far as I know, he left his cloak behind as well. Follow with Jesus. Wherever he goes, that's where I'm going, right? And so he'll be part of, in the very next chapter, then you have the triumphal entry. As they draw in, there's this triumphal entry that happens. He's walking in, as far as we can tell, as Mark sets up the narrative, he's walking into Jerusalem with Jesus, right, in that triumphal entry parade, just like the rest of the disciples are and the people that he've gathered along the road and that have come in that way, right? Because why, right? Because he decides, I'm going to follow Jesus because of what Jesus has done for me, right? Versus the rich man who said, I have lots of stuff. I can't follow Jesus because of all my stuff, right? So we have these sort of two accounts of, wealth and what it does to people and how it works. Then you have the cleansing of the temple because you've made it a den of thieves, right? Just over and over and over, we see these sort of stories here about what's going on. The tenants that he tells the parable, right? And what's the problem with them, right? They want the vineyard for themselves, right? His parable is about spiritual things, and they perceive, the Pharisees they're speaking out to us, we're the bad tenants. But the story he uses is about accumulating physical stuff, right? And then, hey, can we pay taxes to Caesar? Or can we just keep all our coins, right? Like it's just one after the next, right? And then you finally get, this idea of, and here comes the widow, right? And she gives all that she has, sort of to summarize this driving home point about the wealth problem that's kind of running through those chapters in that narrative.
Yeah, well, and then you have like the Sadducees trying to trick him right in the middle of that, with that silly, we finally got one.
Right, we got a good one.
We're going to get him with this one.
Yeah.
Of course, Jesus continually just shows his overwhelming wisdom.
Yeah.
Just like, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And this is why.
And here's why. You're badly mistaken, I think one of the translations says. Right, you're badly mistaken.
You are horribly mistaken.
Yeah. And you know what I didn't notice until like just now actually was, the widow's mite story, right? The last thing before that story is he says, we get a very shortened version of the woe on the scribes and the Pharisees, right? And listen to the one that Mark records for us. He says, beware the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and light greetings in the marketplaces and have the best seats in the synagogue, places of honor and feasts, who devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. They'll receive greater condemnation. Here comes a widow to put in her only 2 mites, right, that she has, which almost makes you wonder, right? Like, why does this widow have nothing in the first place? Wait, Jesus just said these scribes like to take, and they devour widows' houses. And now here's a widow who has nothing. Right? Which never should have been the case, right? If you read the law, they're all obeying the law of Moses. This should never be the case. That should be this widow who has nothing. Apparently, the reason why is the scribes aren't following the law like they ought to have, right? And still she gives all. She doesn't say, "Oh man, I've read that law and these scribes aren't upholding it. No, they're terrible." Right? She doesn't attribute their poor behavior to say God's not faithful. She still, you know, puts in everything she's got, trusts God in spite of the things that she's actually seen with her eyes from humans and those who should have known better.
Yeah. The last thing that I would maybe point out from 12, we skipped over this other encounter. But you've got all of these encounters where people are coming up and questioning Jesus, trying to trap him. I don't know if this is the exact same individual that Matthew records
Sure.
or not. But it appears that this guy is pretty sincere, kind of like the rich young ruler who seemed very sincere.
Yeah, tell me, what can I do? Right? Yeah.
And, then he says, hey, perceiving or, hearing this dispute between Jesus and the scribes and the Pharisees and all that, he asks, what's the most important commandment of all?
Yeah.
And Jesus responds, and this guy's like, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Nailed it. That's good. Right? Yeah.
Right? And what he added at the end was, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. Greater than all of those deeds that the scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees and the elders, they're always teaching so much about all the things. And Jesus saw that he answered wisely. And he said, buddy,
Yeah.
you're not
Yeah.
far.
Hey, right.
You are so close
right.
to the kingdom of God. And after that, no one dared to ask him any more questions. Yeah. So I want to be a truth seeker like that guy and a humble person filled with faith, being willing to sacrifice like that poor widow. And I want to be like Jesus was, filled with compassion all the time and just doing it anyway, regardless of what it costs me.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end, right? Is sort of keep that that thought there in our minds.
That's what I took away from this week. So with that said, yeah, we're reaching our time limit. We could go for hours, really, if we wanted to, but for the sake of y'all out there, we'll end right there with that. But what did you guys see from the reading? That's what we would like to know. If you haven't joined in with us on the app, this week we didn't have a terrible amount of comments going in on the YouVersion app. The link's always in the YouTube videos in the description, so you can join in at any time, I believe, or add some comments in YouTube, or send us an email. So yeah, we would love to interact more with y'all. If you too are feeling like there's room to grow, then you're in a good place, because just knowing that is half the battle. As G.I.
I was going to say, you're going there. You're going to go there. I could think about it. I can see it coming. We're up at the same age.
So for everybody out there from the Gen X,
Yeah, right. The G.I. Joe era there.
But it's an amazing thing to be humble and to grow and to know that you're inadequate, but there's hope and there's a lot to look forward to. So we'll leave you with that. Leave your comments, questions below, and we'll see you tomorrow. All right. God bless everybody.